Welcome. Today we're going to be doing another part on the floor. This will be mostly in response to the discussion generated by the previous part of the floor, which itself was to do with dragon response missions and kind of the general state of the game. We're coming to the end of the year now. Tends to be a good time to actually talk about that stuff. I know most people on YouTube like to do their state of the games in the early year so they can clickbait with the current year in the title, but hey, I might do an episode of the floor on the whole controversy about the hackers and stuff. I'm not sure yet. I feel like my response video was pretty good. There are a few clarifying points that I never expressed there. It was kind of imperfect, like script-wise. It was written largely in a hurry and fairly late at night, but we'll see. In general, I think the only important things that needed to be said have been said. The footage in the background is related to my current in-game project, which is to get one of my characters to full legendary. Now, I know I've been on a bit of a crusade the past few years, pointing out that I don't consider myself an Elementalist main. Most of my gameplay is not on Elementalist these days. However, since Ellie was my main for a few years right at the start, it's on Ellie I have all the weapon categories covered and so on, and, I feel good putting it on list. So, my project is to get all the trinkets, all the armor, all the weapons, but then also all runes and sigils, including a rune for the Aqua Breather and including sigils for the underwater weapon as well. I mean, the nice thing about Ellie is we only have one set down there, so you only need two legendary sigils for underwater, the frivolous purpose of them being underwater instead of 4. But yeah, it's a bit of a project, and yesterday I had a really good moment. I actually managed to finish the World versus World ring conflux. There won't be any footage of me running around in World versus World in the background, but I have to say it was so unbelievably tedious because I wasn't getting into comms and I wasn't invested in the matchups or how well, players were actually doing. So I basically spent the whole time roaming and flipping camps, which is what I always end up doing in World vs. World. But let me tell you, and this isn't a criticism of World vs. World itself, but when you're in there only for pips and reward track progress for, gifts of battle, when that is all you are doing and you're basically just burning the clock down and wandering around flipping camps for the sake of it and trying to find people for the sake of it, oh my god, major burnout. But I got lucky and I managed to do a diamond chest this Friday, in basically 2 play sessions. I got a diamond chest, then reset here, I got my next diamond chest, and ended up with just enough tokens for the whole ring. That's actually supposed to be something like a 6-week time gate, but because I already had a ton of tickets from around the Path of Fire launch when I was considering going for Warbringer, I had enough, just enough by 2. If I had 3 less tickets than I had, I would have to wait a whole other week. But so I do have all the trinkets now, and it's kind of cool. That just leaves me with provisioner token time gates and money, essentially. Now that I'm not PvPing, all year I haven't been PvPing, it's actually kind of tricky to get money, and especially to keep up with gem source stuff. So yeah, I'm pretty much on empty at this point, but hey. So one final topic before we get into the questions, kind of a mini channel update. I don't think this deserves its own video because none of my plans have changed, but the way I'm working is changing. As of today, I'm not trying the bulk upload thing anymore. Basically, since October, my productivity has been rubbish. It's not good enough, and all year I've been struggling with this, trying different methods that will hopefully on the average end up with me in a happy place with how many videos I'm putting out and make you guys happier too. So to keep it brief, I'm stepping away from this bulk work idea in which I make a ton of videos all at once. Instead, throughout December, and if it works well, hopefully January, February, the idea is going to be same day uploads. What does that mean? That means after I make this episode of The Floor, I'm going to go off and record an episode of Final Fantasy XII, and it will be the episode that is uploaded today. I'm not going to make, 10 episodes of Final Fantasy XII and slowly trickle them out while I work on other things. It's going to be every day, record in the morning, upload by the evening. That's the plan. And on top of that, my plan since summer has been to start Morrowind in December. That means we got to get on with Daggerfall, and with the whole same day upload thing, that means not only is FF12 returning, but either today or tomorrow, you will see Daggerfall's start as well. The resulting videos are going to be more of a blind, explorative format than a super high prepared version, and we'll see what people's takes are, how entertaining that is, and just keep adapting as we go. So that's it. Pretty exciting news, I hope. And let's jump on in with the Guild Wars 2 stuff. Now, this guy called Legendary Armor, very fitting, says, I'm just waiting for the Legendary Armory. To which Xavier's Gaming says, I doubt they will go through with it. Legendaries are a form of life support for a few modes. I agree with this response. Legendaries really do keep the game going. I have long said that Guild Wars 2, at its very launch in 2012, would have utterly been a complete disaster of a game if it didn't have legendaries to keep people going at the end. The speed at which people leveled with the flat leveling curve, the speed at which people got map completion completed, the speed at which people got all of their exotics done, the speed at which people got through all of the dungeons, which were not as hardcore as they were purported to be, and even got all the dungeon rewards after the devs did that token update, was so fast that Guild Wars 2, from a PvE perspective, ran dry real quick. And then the devs themselves even admitted that the PvP format was basically a beta, even though the game was fully out by the time launch came. Really, the only format I think that was truly thriving in those launch months was World vs. World, which was in an excellent state. All things considered, I mean, there were definitely bugs and kinks to work out, but from a population standpoint and an investment standpoint, hell yeah. But PvE was obviously a very big one for a lot of people, and if legendaries weren't there as that carrot for a lot of people to go for, I think you would have seen enormous outcry. There already were a lot of comments that Guild Wars 2 has no end game. I almost get a twang of nostalgia saying that out loud. That used to be everywhere, guys. And imagine if legendaries weren't there too. So that was true back in the day. I think it's true even to this day. All we've really seen over the years is the goalpost move as new varieties of legendaries are added. Options for your weapons, backpacks being implemented, then armors, then new trinkets. All that said, I don't think that the implementation of an armory will damage legendary value necessarily. I actually look at the legendary armory as something that will add even more value to legendaries for the vast majority of more casual players. In fact, my whole project I talked about at the start of this video really is motivated in good part by the addition of the armory. And for what that's worth as well, doubting that they'll go through with it, I don't know, man. I feel like ArenaNet do eventually get their stuff in. The stuff gets announced and eventually it does appear. There's only one really big outlier for that right now, and that is the World vs. World Alliance story, which we are going on about quite a lot in recent videos. So let's just remind ourselves real quick about the armory. Here's the original post. I'll put it on screen for you guys. It was just a forum post, not a full blog announcement or anything. We're calling this a legendary armory. Here's a quick description. When you bind a legendary, it will be added to the armory as well. Any legendary item that is added to the armory becomes available for use by all characters across the entire account at the same time. This removes the need for you to swap legendary equipment through your characters through your bank on your shared inventory. They've got these 3 bullet points at the bottom. Their goals are to make it feel more valuable to earn and use legendary equipment, to remove the need for players to swap account-bound legendaries between characters, and make it easier to copy the configuration of items from one template to another. So what I'm imagining is a new UI panel here, really, that displays out all of your legendaries in a nice way. And I think if they get good art on that, and you can clearly see lots of legendaries there that are currently grayed out, I think that could really entice people, you know, those of us who are like collecting and want to see it nice and shiny and glowy things on the UI. And that alone should be enough to mean more people than before were getting legendaries, which means on the average more playtime. Yeah, some veterans might be burned by this quality of life. Some, a tiny percent of players might be. Because what this essentially means is if you, say, have 9 characters all with legendary armor, you have every profession in the game covered with its own legendary armor, you've essentially wasted a lot of effort here. And some people are in that position, a good few, where now, you know, you only really ever needed to craft 1 full set of light legendary armor, and then 1 set of medium, 1 set of heavy, and you're done. But I think the trade-off is well worth it here. The number of super hardcores that have gone absolutely mental with all their legendaries versus a sort of fence-sitting, almost hardcore players like those semi-casuals out there who might now, when End of Dragons releases, have this whole other end game to pursue, i.e. filling out the armory. I think it's going to be a positive thing for the game, and I don't think the devs should drop it. Whatever way they cut it, I think the goal here should be to have this for End of Dragons, really, because that's where it will shine the most. Same can be said for the World vs. World alliances. Next, we've got Nerdy Viewer, who says, I don't understand why they don't just recast Zodger's voice actress. They recast Rox in the male Char without any warning before. This is a good point. This actually spurred a long comment chain in the YouTube comments, and I do encourage you guys to respond to each other. I always have a real kick reading that stuff. I think one thing that no one really said in the discussion chain is to point out that the male Char and the Rox recast, they are fairly recent, and they almost look like last resorts to me, right? I think that if they've got a chance to keep Zodja, then they're really going to go for it. You have to remember, for most of the years, Guild Wars 2 had not gone through any recasting, really. There were moments like the death of the, I can't remember his name, and this makes me feel disrespectful, but the old guy that did the voice during the pirate jumping puzzle in Lion's Arch. You know, he passed away. I remember there was a note about that. There's obviously been some shuffling around, but for the main members of the cast, there hasn't been. I think ArenaNet liked to keep it that way for many years. They didn't really have to face the reality that some of their talent was going to walk. And yeah, from a very modern perspective, with these other recasts in mind, I kind of think, yeah, maybe it's time. Just swap Zodja. Some of you guys made points that her illness at the end of Heart of Thorns might have affected her voice somewhat. I mean, you've got Logan to look at somewhat with that, but it's buyable. Or maybe just that she's a bit older now. It's buyable. I don't even think that Felicia's Day's voice is particularly unique or difficult to emulate, right? I think you could get that. So what I actually find quite fascinating about this comment is, if we go about answering that question, why don't they just recast her? Maybe it lays bare the truth, which is kind of what the studio's been saying, and is kind of what we've seen from Felicia, who says she just hasn't been outreached. Maybe the answer is this, guys, that this isn't a problem with her availability. This isn't a problem with her unwillingness. This is simply that ArenaNet isn't outreaching to her to do anything, and the real reason for that is because they just don't have any strong or interesting ideas of what to do with the character. I mean, we've been spurred into this discussion because clearly this is a character that should be present around these moments of Primordus attacking Ratasum and so on. Clearly there's been lots of moments where she could have dipped in, particularly wherever Logan's appeared. I could have imagined Zodja around too. There's been ample opportunity for it, but the devs maybe just weren't ever that inspired about it. It's funny because really looking back at Zodja as a character, as much as we'd like her to return for consistency and logical reasons, I actually don't like her much. She's not a very likable person. She's likable in the early Asura stuff where she's very charming and loving and sweet, and then she becomes horrible throughout the dungeon storyline. Maybe the studio feels the same way. I mean, to write her consistently is to kind of bring this smug, kind of nasty character back to the story. Maybe they don't like that too much. Who knows? It could be some big secret conspiracy about why a certain voice actor hasn't appeared in the game recently, and we in the community are just blind to it. They're hoping that they can just run down the clock until people stop talking, or hope people won't notice in the first place. And if that is going on, which it could be game-wide, what can we really do in the community? Just wait and hope they'll figure things out. Next, we have Rocker, who says, that moment when I've actually been starting to refer to the times between Wing 1 and 3 as the golden days of raiding. And WP drops a video telling you like 17 times that such a thing never existed. And as I keep watching, a silent tear rolls down my cheek. So I do kind of want to return to what I said last time. For those not in the video, the idea was that Guild Wars 2 has never had a stable raiding side to the game. That I made the point that the hardcore endgame PvE players have never felt properly catered to. Fractals these days, through many refinements and updates, are doing pretty well, I think. But like launch fractals were never really that great. Launch dungeons were never that great. And a million other formats between the beginning of the game and now never really settled and truly satisfied endgame PvE enthusiasts. And I still stand by that, particularly if you compare Guild Wars 2 as an MMO to other MMOs which do more properly focus and pivot around their endgame. Proportionally, for all MMOs, those engaging in the hardcore end stuff are obviously going to be the thin slice of the wedge. But in Guild Wars 2, that's even more hyper-focused. There's an even smaller percentage of the full game population that's engaging with it. And the simple reason for that is no one has been happy ever, really. Now, so it's on the back of that comment that I say, there's never really been a golden age for Guild Wars 2. If someone new came to the game and you said, oh, there was a golden age once, they're going to get the mistaken impression that people were once upon a time satisfied. And my argument is that no, people weren't satisfied. And especially through Wings 1 to 3, not only did you have all the incessant whining from the people who never wanted to engage in raiding at all, and maintained that Guild Wars 2 was never meant to have it, which is completely wrong, by the way. You had all those people, but the people even engaged within it were saying saying the wings were coming too slow, even during this golden age. And let's talk about the length of that golden age as well, shall we? The first raiding wing ever, and the first wing of the Forsaken Thicket, the Spirit Veil, that came out in November. Not even the start of November, like mid to late November. The third and final wing, which just predated the start of Season 3 as the stories fed into one another, the final wing was June. So we're talking about 6 months. 6 months, over 8.5 years of this game being running. Now, even if you do call that a golden age, and I appreciate that the narrow space of time to get 3 full wings is quite incredible by today's standards, it's not a long-lasting golden age, and I would argue with every year that goes by, it becomes less and less relevant to think about. All of that said, I did get another comment on YouTube, which made the very fair, I think, and real point that people don't have to recognize they're living through a golden age for it to be a valid golden age in retrospect, right? So even if people weren't happy then, I think it is still fair to say that was the pinnacle, that was the apex, that was the best moment to be a raider in Guild Wars 2. So therefore, isn't that a fair term? And sure, I think on that ground, you're probably right. There was a golden age. It was a very narrow period after the launch of Heart of Thorns. Fair enough. Next we have Just Joe, who says the most hysterical battle between Primordus and Jormag would be the interference of the Deep Sea Dragon, killing them both and absorbing their power. Yes, we've talked about this a few times as well. One untapped area of the story would be to have 2 dragons fighting, and of course on top of that you could have the interference of a 3rd dragon. I've always liked this idea, and if you think about it, it's kind of something that happened in Pokemon, Gen 3 Pokemon. We're kind of talking about Groudon, Kyogre, and Rayquaza situation here, and it would also be a really meaningful way for them to have a finale that leads itself into End of Dragons comfortably, with this now perhaps supercharged Deep Sea Dragon swimming off in that direction, and we go to pursue it, or, you know, maybe it kidnaps one of our numbers, so we have to be really urgent about it, and so on. In the previous part of the floor, I was complimenting what my golden age, not just a raiding golden age, but a true golden age of Guild Wars 2 was, and I said it was Season 3, and particularly towards the end of Season 3, things were so incredible. Hell, actually through the launch of POF and Episode 1 as well, in terms of content size and release and so on. And as much as I praise all of that, the one thing I will say, well, one of many things I would say about Sirens Landing, is it didn't lead into Path of Fire that well. I was a little bit disappointed. We obviously knew that we were going to the desert, and for many of those later releases of Season 3, the question was, okay, how is this leading there? Why are we doing this? Are they, you know, breadcrumbing some stuff out? Is there something intelligent to find out? And in the end, there wasn't. I think in large part because the original plan for that season was to end at Draconis Mons, but then they had a bit of extra time as far as I understand it. So Sirens Landing ended up being created, and now the bridge between Sirens Landing and the desert was just like this weird vision we got. So yeah, it's a vision, go for it. You know, it felt very artificial, it felt very constructed, and a bit lame. I would very much like this idea of the 3 dragons and the Deep Sea Dragon appearing, because that feels like a much more organic way of doing things. I think it was in a previous part of the floor as well, we talked about the idea of you've got this fire and this ice dragon, and what happens when they collide? Well, water, and then the water dragon is you know, charged up from this or whatever. You know, there's maybe some interesting ideas that the devs can play with there. Maybe these 2 twins, as they're now being called, Jormag and Primordus, maybe once long ago, they created the Deep Sea Dragon. You know, we've got this idea of dragon breeding, or, you know, dragon lineages, with the Kralkatoric stuff, and the game does not shy from that. You know, they'll talk about Aureen's grandfather. Jormag specifically talked about Aureen's grandfather in those banger conversations recently, and when the devs aren't scared of using terms like this, you have to assume that they might be thinking about this kind of stuff with those other dragons. So kind of an inconsequential little theory I've got going at the moment is maybe the Deep Sea Dragon is the son or daughter or genderless entity of these 2 other dragons that we're currently dealing with in this story. You know, maybe that's something the devs will go with. So there's a lot of fun ways there they can do it. It's very easy to construct fun and interesting ideas as to how Cantha suddenly comes into the story. That's one of them. Papa Bungle has some criticism about the PvP meta. I've almost 100% quit PvP, aside from the occasional daily and mostly Guild Wars 2, due to the mega balance being just the absolute worst thing that happened to this game. There was definitely some toning down in terms of balance output, but Guild Wars 2 suffers a problem where because everyone is a self-healing hybrid, once you tone down damage to a point, people will become unkillable. And we've had a conga line of unkillable builds since the mega balance. The reason Hollow and Power Herald and Reaper are the best builds right now is because they still have the damage to just chuck someone down in seconds. So I take a quick pause there. I do think you've really hit the nail on the head with those 3 builds and how they can actually still spike someone down. Reaper in particular is really funny for me because when I was last playing PvP, Reaper was very strong. There were actually multiple ways to build it that could be very strong, but it was always crowded out because there was so much damage elsewhere, and of course, if you can just counter pressure the Reaper, that's one of the best ways of dealing with it. All of a sudden I come back and Reapers are actually being used everywhere. I don't actually really like that though, because Reaper is already so strong in other areas of the game. It's such a great option for the most players who are out there in casual PvE, for example. It was fine to me that Reaper was a bit on the back foot in the competitive formats. Now it's even super strong here too, so I do think there's a bit of a loss in that. And yeah, you're right, everyone is kind of their own self-healing hybrid thing because most heal skills are on way too self-heals, are on way too short cooldowns for themselves, and if you get even slightly good at PvP, you can learn to kite and resustain yourself through movement and the terrain and just wait for that heal to come back up and get back in there. As always, and I think this suggestion is more relevant than ever now that they've tuned everything down, I think if the devs want to add a bit more deadliness to the game, just look at heal skill cooldowns. Across the board, blow them up. And in fact, you can do that for a lot of stuff to solve a lot of Guild Wars 2's issues, but they're always reluctant to it. Anyway, to continue your message, also, removing all damage on CCC skills is a nonsense change. Look at other PvP games. League has plenty of CC skills that are big damage. Fighting games, you can get comboed for a majority or even 100% of your health if the opponent is good enough, and if you make a big enough mistake, and those games don't have anywhere near the amount of get out of jail free cards. I've never seen this philosophy in any competitive game ever. You balance the damage on CC based on how easy it is to land and its cooldown. That's a philosophy that would actually make sense. It's pure nonsense, and it's why, unless you're playing something that still almost hits as hard as pre-mega balance, like Nade's Hollow 1v1s, stall out more than they ever have and take minutes. Literally, every part of the mega balance was wrong-headed and basically killed the game for me. Now, that's an interesting take. In the past, I have said that I like the decoupling of big CC not needing damage as well, and the reason for that is because I like clarity on the skills. Guild Wars 2 is a game where we have no shortage of active, currently usable abilities, and the idea that one thing sets up a spike for some damage elsewhere, whether that be from your own skill bar or an ally's, is meaningful to me. You know, one game I've been casually playing since Halloween is Left 4 Dead 2, which I haven't ever really played before this year. I know that's going to sound crazy to some of you guys, but, you know, that's a good example of a game where some characters on the team, if you're in Versus and you're playing as the Infected, some people are only there to set up with CC so that, you know, if you're playing a Smoker, for example, so that other people can then, like, say, a Spitter, actually do the damage afterwards. But then I don't think this is an either-or situation. I think you can have things that do both, and even in Left 4 Dead, you see things that do both, like the Charger. The devs just have to make those tweaks where necessary. So if the Mega Balance had been something that was to establish a standard, and then once the standard is established, they go in there and maybe add damage onto certain CC abilities once again, then I can understand it, and then to some extent they kind of did with Flashbang as a trait, but maybe they haven't done enough. And in fact, a lot of the response I've seen is similar to what Papa Bungle says here for the Mega Balance. It's just that the devs didn't tweak it enough. I don't know what you mean when you say there's been a conga line of unkillable builds. I've missed out on that, and I don't think any of the builds that I'm currently experiencing in there, or was experiencing, I'm now done with it again, now that I've got my amulet, I don't know whether I really consider them to be unkillable. They're just taking a long time, and if someone's smart enough, that disengagement potential feels like it's a lot higher than it used to be. I'm keen to see how this final phase of the Path of Fire era goes on, because, you know, when End of Dragons comes out and the new Elite specs are released, they're just going to wash everything away. Will we see the new Elite specs once again have CC and damage together? I doubt it, but that doesn't mean they can't bring the deadliness back. It's funny, the game has existed for so long now, since Path of Fire's release, that there have been like a good 4 or 5 very different phases of PvP balance. I would be really interested in seeing a YouTube video where someone kind of illuminates the various eras we've had during Path of Fire that have felt very, very different. Because if you look at PoF on a whole, you go far enough back, you've got stuff like Grenade Dodge Roll Hollow, which obviously doesn't exist anymore, but was there for a good long while before being phased out. I don't know if I can agree that every part of the Mega Balance was wrong-headed. You didn't mention any of your feelings about the expertise changes either. I'd be interested to see that in the comments. Narek Tarek touches on something we were mentioning a moment ago. Says, I must say one thing for you about the Golden Age of Guild Wars 2 being the Sirens Landing time. I've spent 2 days in a row in that map alone. I think not only are you 100% correct, but you still probably underestimate the quality of it. It has so many things there, both old and new. The mobs have their basic moveset, but the veteran kingpins give them buff that give them champions and elites of core moves, and not only open world once but a RAR too. I have jumping puzzle that feels like Vizier's Tower 2.0. It has daily integrated gambling mechanics with hearts, and the hearts have so many ways to do them the story teaches you as you go. It has heavy karma sinks, and it has good meta related loot boxes that are so specially done, and the story having special instances next to Divinity's Reach and Brisbane and special area in the map, and the lore on the map, humans that still like Abaddon, revitalization of Ore, the god lore, and Sylvari talking about it, old kings and queens of Aura's ghost, Sylvari risen in relation to them, the Elder Dragon origin, cool bit of Norn and human in there, ruthless char loots with cool song, the big boats you see, mostly Crash and Aura there. A long rambling statement there really, but I agree with you, I do, and you've reminded me of several things that I very much enjoyed about Sirens Landing. The thing you have to take away from it as well though, is you've got to remember the launch state, which for Living World is especially important, because these are these, you know, fleeting, transient releases that people do just flood away from in general. I think Season 4 was pretty good at keeping people there through like the Season 4 trains and so on, but in general people move on. And the fact is that for most of Sirens Landing's true life as a map, it was extremely laggy. The siren mechanic with the special actions that they'd added, or whatever it was that was going on, I think it was the mastery, completely killed that map. It was incredibly hard to get anything done. It was incredibly hard to have satisfying Zerg experiences, if such a thing really exists in Guild Wars, because you were constantly under this horrible latency. And yes, it did get patched, and yes, when population went down, it kind of cleaned up, and even now it's kind of cleaned up, but that tarred the release for a lot of people. What also tarred the release for a lot of people was kind of controversial decisions. Now, I stand with you that quality-wise, they hit so many brilliant bars, and yeah, having like bespoke, proper little environments out in Brisbane and out near Divinity's Reach where you get to go underneath and stuff is great, but a lot of people, they don't care about the substance of a release, they care about the spirit of the release, and, you know, the idea and the concepts that are at play, and the concept that was being presented to us while we were below Divinity's Reach was that our Norn characters and our Char characters and people really that had no business doing it were joining with the Shining Blade and doing all of this human stuff, and these were kind of misguided beats, and I think that a lot of people didn't get away from that. I had a lot of problems as well with the Lazarus stuff at the end there, because it felt like a hasty tack on to properly close the book. A lot of that era of Guild Wars 2 storytelling, as great as it was and as happy as I was to go back to the Massar and these subjects, it also quite transparently felt like the devs just wanted us to shut up about stuff. You know, when you look at Bastion, which to me is like my all-time favorite release for the game, I think it did so many things so well, there is a tinge of Bastion, you know, when you get to that final cutscene, you can feel it in your gut as it's coming, and then you finally watch it and you realize, yeah, they just want us to stop talking about this. They're not gonna keep the mystery going. There's not gonna be any intrigue. There's no further story here. They are closing the book. And, you know, that's a little disappointing. That was a bit disappointing in Bastion, and it was a bit disappointing in Sirens Landing as well, where suddenly we are dealing with the real Lazarus. Oh, here he is, okay, because, you know, we said that the other Lazarus was Balthazar, so here's the real Lazarus, and look, now you get to kill him. There you go, cool. Let's move on. To Siren Landing's credit is there was a little bit of a hint about the Scepter of Ore there, just a little bit. And that is the ultimate, at this point, in unresolved you know, Guild Wars 2 mysteries that should have so much conversation and emphasis on, but as time goes by, people kind of forget about it. At least there was a bit of that, at least. But, you know, in general, I didn't like what they did with Lazarus there. A lot of people got very hung up about the Shining Blade stuff. And with the lag too, it gets dragged down. But you're right, I think they did a lot of really good stuff, and I think sort of the next version of all the God Scriptures were really well written, had some great ideas. It's ore, man. It's hard to do ore badly. Take us back to ore, ArenaNet. That's a good choice at any time. Hell, a dragon response mission over in like an instance of ore, where it's not fiery, it's not icy, but you know, it's a little bit grown up. You know, we've seen maybe these hints that we're going to Lake Doric soon. Maybe if we go back to Sirens Landing or wherever, but now there's plants around. That would be a very good dragon response mission. Very good. You should get on that. Speaking of dragon response missions, the final comment here is from Roan van de Wop, who's talking about the recent releases and says, why would the finale be named Champions? Who's going to be Primordus? His champion? And Shimmer Dancer says Bram, just so he has an excuse to fight Jormag. So, yes, I haven't talked about this on my channel at all, but I think this is a really good idea. It leans into the prophecy. You've already got this current patch is about the Asura quickly and rapidly making this alliance with Jormag and so on. The idea that maybe Primordus will get his own allies somehow. If you think about the prophecy, the idea that one has to kill the other, you know, it's not exactly a new trope in fantasy, but if you think about that interlocking, that's kind of true for the Elder Dragons themselves. I mean, we in the community, we think that they'll just delete each other at the same time. But as far as Jormag is concerned, as far as Primordus is concerned, it's me or the other guy. So it's the same thing. It's a bit hard to justify and figure that bit out, though, because Primordus really is just this, you know, ancient force of danger and damage, and he doesn't really seem to communicate or want to. So it feels like a bit weird for Bram to run over to him, as it were. Also, that's kind of like a Bram's a dick move, so, to a certain extent, isn't it? And I feel like they've already done the whole Bram's a dick thing. I think they actually did that storyline really well in the end, and was some of the best parts of Season 4. So for him to turncoat, so to speak, and become the champion of another Elder Dragon, that's weird. And one final note for you all to chew on, maybe talk about in the comments down below, is what about the Deep Sea Dragon? Who's their champion? And what about Mother? You know, maybe there is this idea that Mother's a spirit of the wild, as we talked about before, but would Mother have a champion? Maybe it's called Champions because the last moments of this whole thing that leads into End of Dragons has something important to say about that. And then you've got Kaith as well, who's kind of like a half champion thing. And at least she was in the recent patch. So there you go, guys. Thanks very much for watching this episode of The Floor. I'm really excited to crack on with some of these other projects, and I hope you're excited to see them too. Thank you, everybody. Any comments down below? Let me have them.